Good morning, it's Market Day Report. Welcome to a Wednesday. All right, let's look at how markets have been trading in the overnight session, and we'll start with the corn market. As corn is up 2.7% week over week, about a 1% gain so far when we look at month over month, but year to date, corn has been down nearly 12%. Losses overnight, December down 3/4 of a penny at 4.15 3/4. What about soybeans? Up nearly 1% week over week, but losses for month over month, 5%. Year to date, down nearly 24%. And the November slipping 4 1/4 overnight, 987.5. Wheat market down nearly 3% week over week, down nearly 2% month over month, and over 9% lower year to date, losing 7 cents in Chicago, 5.69 on the front month. And for hard red in Kansas City, or we call it Kansas City, it's still traded in Chicago though, 5.79 3/4, off 6 3/4. And Minneapolis, which is traded in Minneapolis at 6.11, down 5.5. New York cotton futures have been up a little over 1% week over week, down a little over 1% month over month, and nearly 11% loss year to date. But overnight, 9 points higher, 72.17. All right, we've kind of set the stage for the president of Midwest Market Solutions, Brian Hoops. Brian, what are you watching?
Hey, good morning, Tony. Well, we have more export sales we should probably start talking about here in the grain markets this morning. So 130,000 beans sold to China, 100,000 corn to an unknown destination, and then 259,000 soybeans to an unknown destination. So the last couple of days that we've seen these export numbers, we've seen some buying interest develop, and I would suspect we'll probably see a little bit more interest develop again off of the opening. Now, how high can we go? Well, we completed some retracements yesterday. Corn and soybeans are in downtrending markets right now, I feel, so according to my charts anyway. I think we're in downtrending markets, and we're doing retracements of that big down move. So corn hit a 50% retracement yesterday. Soybeans, maybe a 23%. They just haven't had as much bounce. And you look at the weather in South America here in the U.S., the weather looks really good in South America. They're getting plentiful rains. They've replenished some of their soil moisture profiles, so they're off to a really good start, maybe just a little bit behind their normal planting pace. And here in the U.S., harvest is progressing, and it's actually too dry in some areas. We'd really like to see some rains. And in the longer-term forecast, that winter wheat belt is going to get some rains around November the 2nd, maybe 3 to 5 inch type of heavy rains in Kansas and Oklahoma, Nebraska areas. So hopefully they desperately need the rain. So hopefully we do get that rainfall. So I look at these markets here as downtrending markets. Wheat's just entering its downtrend, and any rallies really need to be sold. They need to be hedged, and you can look at retracements or resistance. But with option expiration coming up on Friday for the November grain options, we may see a lot of volatility going into that expiration. But afterwards, I don't know if there's a lot of support for these markets other than these export sales that we're seeing every morning.
Glad you said export sales coming out in the morning. Export sales numbers from USDA, and that in front of another report from USDA on Friday. So hang on, we'll come back and talk about that latter report, the cattle on feed. And Brian Hoops will join us as Market Day Report continues in a moment. So USDA out with that cattle on feed report. We'll get that at the close on Friday. That's at 2 p.m. So we'll trade for the rest of this week. And what will we trade? Could it be cash cattle? Well, we'll find out in a moment with Brian Hoops. First off, how did we close the market yesterday? Live cattle futures settled higher on the session. October up $1.05 at 188.05. 188.12 on the most active December, gaining $1.30. And for the feeders on Tuesday, it was a gain of 232 on the November at 248.92. And for the hog trade, hogs again up 16% year to date aided in part by an 85-cent gain on the December yesterday, 79.12. President, Midwest Market Solutions, is Brian Hoops. Brian, what's happening in livestock?
Well, it's been a very good week for cattle futures. They've been moving higher. It looks like we were going to see higher cash trade this week. I heard some clients talk about 190 is what they were gunning for, with very strong packer margins. Cutouts mostly holding in here and trying to move higher as well. Now, there's some news overnight about the E. coli outbreak across mostly Colorado and Nebraska. It's not really tied to beef, but it is in McDonald's cheeseburgers or double quarter pounders or whatever. But it looks like it was tied to onions that were put on these burgers. So it's not directly related to beef, but yet it's enough probably to make the trade nervous. And we're starting to see a little selling coming into the opening here. So you look at the bid and ask. Early this morning, it was kind of a steady type of opening. Now we're looking at 30 to 50 lower, and it could be much lower than that. Kind of depends on how some of these algorithm trades interpret this news wire. So we're either going to see a lower open or real sharply lower opening, and then from there, if it's sharply lower, we probably come back. If it's a slightly lower opening, we might see a little bit additional selling pressure. It looks to be kind of a wild day in this cattle market. But as you mentioned, cattle on feed on Friday looks friendly. All the other news is friendly except for this news that really isn't tied to beef, other than beef being on the same patties in McDonald's as the onions.
Sure. And how often is it that it's some small piece of news? And this isn't small. I mean, it obviously is a serious issue, but really not tied to beef, where it can affect a market like that.
Yeah, it happens. We had the bird flu concerns for quite some time. Every time we heard a news wire about bird flu, it seemed like the market sold off, but it came back every time. And I kind of suspect that's what's going to happen here this morning. A little sell-off, and then that market comes back because it's really not tied to beef, and the fundamentals are still very strong.
Okay, Brian, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Brian Hoops is with us Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with the Market Day Report. We'll also talk to him a little later this afternoon on the radio side with Commodity Wrap, and that on Rural Radio 147.